This happened back when I was in college. Spring break had just ended, and I was driving from my parents' house back to my college dorm. The drive itself was about 3 hours. There were a few small towns on the way, but other than that, it was pretty much just endless fields. I started my drive late, like 10 p.m. I was still making my way out of the town my parents lived in, when I saw a hitchhiker walking on the side of the road. He was a tall, skinnier guy carrying a duffel bag. As I got closer, he stuck out his thumb. I honestly felt really bad for the guy, and seeing as he was walking in the same direction I was going, I rolled down my window and asked if he wanted a ride. He named a nearby town and asked if I was going in that direction. I was, and so I told him yes and unlocked the door. He got in the front seat, and I realized right away that he was a lot older than I thought, like at least in his 40s. He kept to himself for a good part of the ride, which I actually didn't mind. I had the radio on, so it wasn't just awkward silence or anything. It wasn't until around 30 minutes into the drive with the guy did I start to think I made a mistake. The guy started clutching his stomach while groaning and complaining that he didn't feel well. He pretty much just hunched himself in the passenger seat, swaying back and forth. I told him to feel free to open up his window for some fresh air, but he never ended up doing it. To say I felt uncomfortable would be an understatement. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand if the dude wasn't feeling well, but here I am driving, while just next to me is this guy groaning and swaying back and forth. There weren't really any towns or rest areas nearby. I didn't want to just tell the guy to get out and completely strand him in the middle of nowhere, so I kind of just sat there trying to focus on the radio. This went on for another 15 minutes, when the guy said,
"Dude, I really don't feel good. Can you take the third next exit?"
This caught me off guard. Not the part about wanting to stop, I was more so expecting him to say that at some point, but the part about the exit. The guy specifically said the third next exit. I remember those being his exact words. In the moment, I obviously thought it was weird. If I myself were sick, I would be much quicker to want to just pull onto the side of the road, or at the least take the very next exit. I asked the guy if he just wanted me to pull to the side of the road real quick, but he sternly told me no. This should have been a clear red flag, but I ultimately reasoned the specific exit he wanted me to take must have been a rest area I was unaware of, so I agreed. A few minutes later and I took the exit, but absolutely nowhere in sight was any kind of rest area. I started pulling to the side of the road when the guy said,
No, keep going. We should go down a bit further."
Again, this should have been a red flag I picked up on, but I did what he said. Eventually he told me to stop. He got out and within seconds disappeared into the darkness. I waited for the guy to come back for a few minutes, when I saw 5 hooded figures walking towards my vehicle, only revealed by the light of my headlights. They were clearly carrying weapons, and now charging towards my vehicle. I threw the car into drive and started darting it in the other direction, but they actually started shooting at me. From what I recall, 5 gunshots were fired, 2 of which hit the back of my car. Though, even still, I was able to get out of there. I didn't stop the rest of the way back. I did call the police and report it, but I never got any follow-up. When I made it back to my dorm, I would find the bullet holes in the back of my car. I think it's worth noting that one of them was only a couple inches from my tire, which makes me think whoever was shooting was aiming for the tires. But I'll never be able to know for sure. I don't fully know the motives of that hitchhiker that night, but at least to me, it's obvious he intentionally lured me into that specific spot, which, might I remind you, was nowhere near any type of civilization. I have since never picked up another hitchhiker. This happened multiple years back, when I was around the age of 11. I was an only child, and back then my family only had one car, which my dad would usually take to work each weekday. This meant anytime my mom had to go somewhere while he was at work, she would either have to walk or hitchhike. Now, it should be mentioned that back then hitchhiking was a lot more socially acceptable. Plus, at the time, we lived in a decently small town, where for the most part everyone knew everyone. From what I can recall, this took place on a Thursday. My dad had dropped off my mom and I at the grocery store on his way to work. This of course meant we would have to find a ride back home, though we'd done this many times before and never had any issues. Only a couple minutes into our walk back home, a driver pulled up next to us willing to give us a ride. It was some guy in a white pickup truck who we'd never seen before. He told us to get in the back, and we did. My mom started giving him directions to our home from the highway, but it honestly looked like the guy was just ignoring her. And when we came to our exit, this was confirmed, as he straight up drove right past it. The guy then went on to explain how he had to make a quick detour first. This was extremely unnerving, but after a while we came up to a farm. The driver took out the keys, told us to wait in the car, and disappeared. My mom clearly didn't know what to do. I mean, we couldn't just leave. We were in an unfamiliar area in the middle of nowhere. A few minutes later and the driver came back, but now with the second guy. The guy looks at us and starts flipping out, screaming at the driver. Now, I'm not sure if this is exactly what was said, but this is what I can remember. The guy screams at the driver that he shouldn't have brought someone with a child, and that there's no way anything can happen now. From what I recall, more things along those lines were said, but like I just mentioned, I can't remember exactly. The driver then got back in the truck and apologized to us. My mom would sternly tell the man to take us back to where he had picked us up. She technically hadn't given him our address yet, and for obvious reasons now did not want that information known. The drive back was done in complete silence. Looking back, my mom and I can both agree that the purpose for that stop was not as innocent as a simple detour. We honestly see ourselves as lucky for making it out of that situation. We lived in that town for 5 years after that, and never once saw those two guys again. This took place in November of 2005. Each year my job would give us 10 vacation days, and seeing as I hadn't yet used any this year, I decided to take a week off to visit different states around the US. To get around, for the most part, I would actually hitchhike, which is something I've done multiple times in the past. Despite all the horrible recognition it gets nowadays, I actually really enjoy doing it. I've met a lot of people through hitchhiking that I still call friends to this day. Anyway, it was around 2 p.m. I was walking down the road, giving the usual thumbs up signal hitchhikers typically give. It had been a while since my last ride, and I'll be the first to admit I was getting a little desperate. Eventually, a red pickup truck pulls up next to me. Inside were two men. My best guess is they were in their 40s. One of them asked me where I was going, to which I responded. They both looked at each other for a second, then back at me and signaled me to get in. They seemed normal enough, and so I tossed my bag in the back, got in, and shut the door. But I quickly realized the whole floor of the vehicle was completely covered in different types of bullets. Before I had time to even rethink my decision, we were already going 60 down the highway. I tried to engage in some small talk to ease the tension, and it actually sort of worked. But somehow the topic landed on how one of the guys had just gotten out of prison for aggravated assault. And a disturbingly short amount of time later, they started asking me how much money I had. This is when I started to realize I could be in some serious danger. Now, I had been hitchhiking for a couple days by that point. I didn't look the best, and so I tried to play it off that I was homeless and had no money whatsoever. This response was met with complete silence. And for the next 30 minutes or so, not a single word was said. Though, multiple times, I would catch the driver looking up at me through the rearview mirror. I honestly just tried to ignore it, something I regret doing to this day. Fast forward 15 minutes, and to my horror, the driver turned off the highway and started down some unpopulated dirt road. I instantly shot up and said,
Dude, where are we going?
After 15 seconds of no response, while the car was still driving, I grabbed my bag, unlocked the door, and full-on dove out of the car. Instantly, I looked up to see the red pickup slam on its brakes, shortly after followed by the reverse lights turning on. I cannot explain to you how fast I got up and ran into a nearby cornfield. I ran for 5 minutes, when I swear I could hear gunshots behind me. They were clearly distant, but still. I ran for another 5 minutes when I reached the side of the main highway. I would then call the police, explain the situation and my current location, and wait in the cornfield until an officer arrived. I would then be driven to the nearest police station, where I would file a police report. Though, in terms of descriptions, there wasn't really much I had to give, other than two men inside a red pickup truck. I hadn't gotten the license plate number, and I didn't even really see the full faces of the guys, or even remember them. The whole situation was no doubt the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I don't completely know what those guys had planned, but I truly believe I could have lost my life that day. While I still hitchhike occasionally, I am now far more cautious in the cars I get into.